Are we good to go, Jewel?
Yes, sir. It's Apple time. We're ready.
Okay.
All right. Good morning, board, staff, and members of the public. After my statement, the chairman will open this meeting and explain the rules for this electronic meeting. Please keep your microphone on mute when you are not speaking. The technical support team may proactively mute participants if the microphone is picking up background noise. Board members should check to make sure their microphone is not muted before speaking. You may text me at 540-336-3948 at any time during the meeting if you need technical support, and an IT tech will call your cell phone to assist. I now turn the meeting over to Committee Chairman Allen.
Thank you, Jewel. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'll read a brief statement. Hopefully this is the last time I have to read this statement. In accordance with the Governor's State of Emergency Declaration and executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, Continuing Ordinance, and General Assembly 2020 Budget Amendments 28 and 137, Loudoun Water will meet today in an electronic meeting. In compliance with these special procedures, only action items necessary to continue operations of Loudoun Water and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities will be discussed during today's meeting. Reports and other information are available on board docs. Public notice and meeting access information was provided on the Loudoun Water website. A recording of that meeting will be available on the website. Board members wishing to speak are reminded to press unmute and identify themselves by name so that staff can accurately capture comments. All items will be recommended to the July 8th, 2021 board meeting. The board secretary will now take a roll call attendance of the committee members.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Allen?
Here.
Mr. Byers?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
I would also like to acknowledge that Mr. Kobliss and Mr. Bonfils are on the call. Thank you.
Thank you, Jewel. I would like to hear a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. This is Bill.
I'll second it. This is Brent.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, Jewel.
Mr. Byers?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Thank you. Unanimous, sir.
Okay, action items. The first one is post 65 Medigap plan. Tom Chuta.
Good morning, everybody. All right.
Tom, bear with us for just one moment. Michael's working to give you control.
Can you request one more time? Sorry.
Yep, got it.
Yep.
All right,
Okay,
good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Chunt. I'm the Managing Director of General Services. I don't typically get to present to you, so it's my pleasure to do so today. That will be co-presenting with me today is Mr. Dave Boomersheim at Boomersheim Consulting. Dave was an integral part of developing the county's retirement program back in 2012 when they totally revamped their plan. So we're happy to have Dave with us today as well. So as far as our agenda, I'm going to talk about what today's request is going to be. And Mr. Boomersheim is going to go ahead and go through the proposed plan summary, the current plan, the background, the plan goals, proposed plan benefits, and the actuarial review, and provide some conclusions with that. So today's request is to establish a post-65 Medigap plan similar to other comparator organizations. Back in 2019, we did a compensation study that also included looking at benefits of our comparator organizations and also the county. And with that, one of the things that we were lacking, it was a post-65 Medigap plan, which is why we are here today. This also does support the strategic plan of attract and retain a high quality workforce, which I think is important moving forward. for attracting and also keeping our folks around for quite some time. So the program that Dave is going to present to you today, I feel like rewards our current employees and future employees with longevity while continuing to be fiscally responsible moving forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Boomershine at this point.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And as I go through these slides, if you have any questions, please just stop me and we'll take the discussion wherever you want to go. And thank you for your time today. So this is the proposed plan summary that we are asking for. The pre-65 retiree medical program that you have in place is a good one and should be maintained. So we are only looking at the gap after post-65. We're talking about adding a benefit structure. And the way that we want to approach this is to have a defined benefit approach for employees who are closer to retirement. And what I mean by that is that the benefit that the retiree is going to get after age 65 is defined by formula. It's going to be a simple formula that we're proposing. For anybody else that's younger and shorter service, we're going to suggest a defined contribution approach, much like a 403B, a 401k plan, where the employee will have an account balance that accumulates with contributions and investment income until age 65, where they can start getting reimbursed for medical expenses after that. So we have a Group A and a Group B in the approach. And the key statistics as a result, getting to the end of the presentation, which I will come back and explain and put things in perspective, is that we are increasing the actuarial liability by over $4 million, $4.1 million. The annual cost would be $990,000. And again, I'm going to put this in perspective. And the funding ratio, the assets divided by the liabilities for the defined benefit portion, will be at 43%. And that's a good ratio. And again, I will keep coming back to these items. Okay, next one. Next slide.
Yep, bear with me here.
Okay.
There we go. Sorry.
Okay. So the current plan, the pre-65 plan that we have, the employees have to complete 15 years of service to be eligible for the plan. And they have to retire directly from active employment to the retiree status and have the medical coverage while they were an active employee. So, and then if they meet the Virginia retirement system eligibility for retirement, either under Plan 1 or Plan 2, the one that changed back in 2008, to be eligible for plan benefits. And therefore, health coverage will be continued up to age 65. And the one thing I really do like about this plan is that it is a graded benefit plan. There is a greater reward for more years of service. And you can see this, the employer subsidy schedule here based on years of service, that the employer subsidy will go up for healthcare premium, for the retiree healthcare premiums, from 35% up to 45, 60, up to 75% if the employee had completed 30 years of service. This pre-65 OPEB plan is both reasonable and competitive. And you'll see in a few minutes that you've done a fantastic job of funding this plan. It is in a great position right now. So we don't see any need to revise that pre-65 plan. Okay, and that background, there we go. So the pre-65 plan, leave as is, like the graded benefit approach based on years of service, but the hole that we have is that there is no post-65 coverage or benefits, and this is clearly not competitive. In the past 3 years, the contributions that Loudon Water has made for the OPEB plan have totaled anywhere from $491,000 up to $635,000. And there was another year where we paid $560,000. So you have been well funding this plan. And again, you'll see more in a few more slides. And we are talking about over 300 actives and currently 17 retirees. Next slide. So the goals that we want to achieve with this program clearly is to add a post-65 program. But we want it to be reasonable and competitive, both for the employee and for Loudon Water. The cost, and what I mean by that is that the cost for the added benefits should be reasonable and competitive, but should also be subject to future management, to budget control, to not having any cost volatility, which can happen with defined benefit plans. So again, the added benefits for employees closer to retirement should be under a defined benefit approach. And the reason we don't want a defined contribution approach for this group is that there's not enough time to accumulate enough funds to be competitive. So we want to be a little bit paternalistic and provide benefits that are competitive, and that the resulting unfunded actuarial liability and the increase in the cost and liability that we're talking about are manageable into the future, and maintain a competitive plan funded ratio. And the reason we're concerned about that is that the bond rating agencies have been paying attention to retirement plans, closer attention to retirement plans over the past decade. Clearly, they were more concerned about pension plans in the public sector. Then they became more concerned about OPEB plans and their liabilities and costs. So that is a concern that we want to be aware of and we want to consider as we go forward. So what we're really talking about is one of the key principles here is shifting from a defined benefit approach for the people who are closer to retirement to a defined contribution approach to help manage that future cost volatility. Okay. So here's the proposed plan that we were talking about for the post-65. And the team and I worked through many scenarios, up to about 15 to 20 scenarios. So we reviewed the costs, the liabilities, the plan designs for multiple scenarios, and are suggesting for your consideration this proposed program. So again, maintain the pre-65 benefits, add a post-65 benefit structure. And for any employees who are currently in 2021 over age 35 and have completed 15 years of service, we utilize the defined benefit approach. Again, like that graded schedule, the benefit would be a simple flat dollar amount for every year after age 65. For any employees who have completed 15 to 19 years of service, that would be $2,600. And you can see it going up to 33, 44. And anybody who has 30 plus years of service at retirement will be getting an annual benefit to reimburse medical expenses up to $5,600. We're also including spouses in the proposed plan, which means that this plan is really an employee plus one for the health coverage. And for the employee with 30 plus years of service and married with a spouse, the employee is eligible for $5,600 and the spouse is eligible for $5,600. So, and we also wanted to include, we want to make sure that we're not ignoring the people who are coming over to Loudon Water and bringing Virginia Retirement System years of service. So anybody who brings over 10 years of VRS service and was hired before 2008, they will also be covered under this plan. So the current coverage adds up to 82 actives at this point in time, and we will also include the 17 retirees for this post-65 coverage. Okay. So the employees who are under 35 and 15 will utilize that defined contribution approach. And we also want to have a few restrictions to help control the administration of the plan. And these employees will be eligible after completing 5 years of service. And they will get a benefit if they complete 15 years of service. They'll be vested after they complete 15 years of service. And this is key, because if they leave, if they build up an account balance, but they leave before 15 years of service, they will be forfeiting that account. That forfeiture will be used to reduce future employer contributions. So it helps with the cost control for this program. The proposed benefit here would be an annual employer contribution every year that the person's an active employee into the defined contribution account of $3,000 per year. And supposedly that will accumulate up to age 65. They will have an account balance that will be used to reimburse medical expenses after that point in time. And the coverage for this group, well, we've been calling it Group B, is 192 active employees, but 153 of those have over 5 years of service now and would be eligible for the employer contribution each year. And the end result, again, of this program would be an increase in liability of $4.1 million, annual costs up to $990,000, and the funding ratio at 43%. And if we go to the next slide, I can put this in perspective. Okay, the current plan, actuarial valuation, back in 2019. And just to give you a quick summary, when we do an actuarial evaluation, we have 4 inputs: the employee census data, the assets of the plan provisions, and the actuarial assumptions for future provisions. And we project the people out until they retire and project retirees out until they die, and bring that all back to the present and calculate what the actuarial liability is, so we can compare that to the plan assets and see how well funded the plan is. In 2019, we had liabilities of 3.6 million, assets of 1.9. Subtract the assets from the liability, and you have the unfunded liability at 1.7 million. That's a mortgage that needs to be paid off at some point in time. And the assets divided by the liability, the funding ratio is at 52%. And again, we keep on comparing to that because we know that that's one of the key statistics that the bond rating agencies are looking at. When we translate that into an annual cost to fund the plan, there is no DC plan at this point in time in 2019. But the DB portion, the normal cost, the value of benefits accruing each year was at $108,000. The amortization, the payment to pay off that unfunded liability over a 19-year period, is at $152,000. The total annual cost is at $260,000 based on the 2019 valuation. Now remember, the Loudon Water has contributed towards this plan, towards the benefits and the funding into the trust fund that's been set up in the neighborhood of $490,000 to $635,000 over the past couple of years. So you've been overfunding the plan, but what you're really doing is paying off that unfunded liability ahead of time. And the fact is that you've done a fantastic job of addressing this issue, which most public sector plans have not done anywhere near this type of job. In fact, the average funding ratio for OPEB plans across the country is in the neighborhood of 10 to 15%. And the reason for that is that a lot of plans have not set up the trust fund and pre-funded the plan, and they have a 0 funding ratio. So now when we update the valuation in 2021 with the updated data and healthcare costs and so on, we find that the experience has been very good for your healthcare plan. The liability is down a little bit. The assets are up significantly, both because of the employer contributions going in and the great investment returns that you've had over the past couple of years. So now we have an unfunded liability of only $178,000, funding ratio of 95%. Annual cost is now at $75,000 per year. Looking at this picture, this is a great time to address the issues, any issues that you would want to do with the plan. So now we go to the proposed plan in 2021, and the liability has increased for the added defined benefit program up to $7.5 million. Assets are still at 3.2. The unfunded liability is now at $4.3 million, and the funding ratio is at 43%. which is clearly down from the 95%, down from the 52%. But the fact is, in the whole picture in the public sector and for the bond rating agencies, that is an excellent funding ratio at this point in time. Because really, we go back 10 years and nobody was funding their OPEB plan back when GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, changed the rules, and all of a sudden everybody became aware of these liabilities. So being at 43% versus that average of somewhere between 10 to 15% is a good thing. The annual cost, the normal cost is clearly increased for the defined benefit portion up to $159,000. The normal cost or the annual employer contribution for the defined contribution plan, the $3,000 times the number of eligible employees, is at $459,000, and the amortization of the unfunded liability is at $372, adds up to $990,000. But keep in mind that defined contribution portion is kind of like a maximum contribution at this point in time. We expect more people to be eligible, but as we go into the future, we know that there are going to be forfeitures, and we're not accounting for that at this point in time. We have to do that on an annual basis. So next slide. To sum it up, again, pre-65 plan, competitive, should be maintained. Post-65 benefits should be considered. Now is a good time to consider that program. We also want to manage those future plan liabilities and the costs and clearly minimize the volatility. We know that assets will go up and down. We know that the liabilities will go up and down according to demographics and healthcare costs. So we want to minimize the exposure to volatility with that program. The post-65 benefits should utilize a defined benefit approach for those closer to retirement, very paternalistic, and the defined contribution approach for the others, which helps control that future cost volatility and helps with the budget control too. And we do want the DC benefits to be comparable to the DB plan benefits. And what we did was, with the $3,000 benefit, we took an average age, accumulated an account balance up to 65. Of course, this is theoretical, and came up with a balance of around $180,000. We compared that to the present value of the benefit for the person who for the defined benefit person who had 30 years of service and has spouse coverage, and how long that benefit will pay out, and what the present value of that is at age 65, to make sure that these components are comparable to each other. And we also add in that the defined contribution plan eligibility should be restricted to help with the plan administration. I know I went through a lot there. Let me know, are there any questions or any further discussion that we want to go over at this time?
Mr. Koblis has a question.
Yeah, insurance is not my thing, so I usually let other people take care of insurance for me. It's for many reasons, but let me just get this straight. This is $1 million a year cost to Loudon Water on top of what we're doing right now, in order to have a health care plan for people over 65 years old on top of Medicare that they would normally get. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're talking about a Medigap program which provides benefits carved around Medicare. So Medicare,
and then it does Loudoun County and Loudoun County School Board have this same plan?
Loudoun County has a program that was more complicated. They actually broke up their groups, and this is public information, so I'm not giving anything away, but they broke up into 4 groups: retirees and those very close to retirement. Then they had a group that was close to retirement, but not very close to retirement. And those two groups got a defined benefit program, different program, lesser benefit for the second group. Then they had two other groups that went into the defined contribution program, and it was a group basically under age 35 was a third group, and then new employees were a fourth group. And new employees will be covered under the defined contribution plan under your program. So they had a more complicated program, and it had more groups, but it had the similar concept, just more complex. And you're addressing that annual cost. I should also add one more thing. That amortization piece, the $372,000 for the proposed plan, that is amortizing the unfunded liability over 19 years. So theoretically, that cost will be paid off after 19 years and will go away. Now, the fact is, we know that there will be changes and adjustments as we go into the future. So don't hold tight to that 19 years. But that will be addressed as we fund the program as we go forward. As we do actual evaluations every 2 years, we will be addressing that and making sure it's
okay, let me re-ask the question because I don't know if I understood your answer at all. Does the county have the same type of plan? I know it's more complex or whatever. Are they getting the same benefits that we will be giving, or are we giving a much better plan than what they're doing?
Again, because of their complexity, that's a little difficult to do. It is not the same benefits because we only have two groups versus the four groups. It is comparable. It is comparable, and the proposed program is competitive with what's with other plans in Northern Virginia. In Southern Virginia, they're not as competitive as Northern Virginia. They do not provide the richness of the benefits that we see in Northern Virginia.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. And like Mark said, this is not my bailiwick. So I apologize if some of my questions are less than intelligent. So let me understand this. So someone turns 65, they get Medicare, and then they want typically to get a supplemental plan to cover what Medicare doesn't cover. So what's the typical annual premium for a Medicare supplemental plan? I mean, is it $3,000 a year, $4,000 a year?
It's probably more like 4.
Okay.
So
what I'm surprised about is that our unfunded liability goes up. I mean, are retirees from Loud and Water just using this plan, this contribution, to pay their supplemental? Is there any other thing other than paying $4,000 a year? What else would a retiree be using this money for?
They could be using it for vision or hearing or other incidental costs
that aren't covered by Medicare Part B. Okay.
Right.
So I don't understand why we go up 990,000 and why the liability goes from $1.7 million to $4.2 million if all we're doing is paying $4,000 a year basically to cover someone's supplemental. I mean, I'm obviously I'm missing something. I don't get why it's so expensive.
No, that's a very, very good question. What the requirement under the Government Accounting Standards Board, under GASB, is that if you have a defined benefit, like a pension plan, or like your current retiree OPEB plan, other post-employment benefit plan, the pre-65 plan, if you have a defined benefit program where the employer is promising we will supply these benefits, then the requirement is to do an actuarial valuation where you have to project everybody out into the future. So when we're looking at that person at age 65, we're not just looking at that annual benefit for that 1 year, similar to what we're doing with the defined contribution plan. The requirement is that you have to project that employee, that retiree, according to actuarial assumptions, out into the future, and then discount that back to the present, translate it into a actuarial liability for future benefits, not just 1 year, but until the person dies. And then translate that into a liability and then compare that to the assets. That's why the liability is going up by $4 million. So the liability for the current program, the pre-retirement plan, is at 3.4 million. The added plan is adding 4.1 million to that liability. That is what you're funding to try and pay off, the mortgage that you want to pay off.
Okay,
Okay.
that makes sense. Thank you.
Dave, could I just add, I think it might help with some of that questioning too, is a couple things. Yes, when we did our survey or comparison in 2019, yes, the county has a post 65 plan. Again, complicated, but they have it. And others have it as well. A lot of the public sector have it because, as you know, it's a lot, public sector is a lot different than private sector. And so we're trying to keep our benefits package competitive and also keep our employees out loud and water. So this is an added bonus. And then Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that 990,000 isn't the total addition. I think we have to compare that to what we've already been paying. Isn't that correct?
Oh, yes. The fact that in your budget and what you've been doing for the past couple of years is between 400 and 600,000, 630,000. So we're really comparing to what that funding is, at least in my view, the actuary's view, is that we're looking at what you've been paying in part of your budget and what the increase is to get up to 990,000. And that was also why I was saying this is a very good time to be looking at any issues that you want to address.
Right. And just
Okay,
as
so
a fine, I'm sorry, Terry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So the delta is more like 400 or 500,000, not 990.
That's
It's
correct.
yeah.
Okay. All right. That
And
makes me
also
feel
just,
better.
in the actuarial evaluation, we're being very conservative, assuming that, everyone is sort of an employee plus one. So again, Dave, would you agree? This is sort of worst case, if you will, as far as expenses go. And keep in mind that defined benefit is the only piece that affects our other post-employment benefits calculation. Those defined contributions do not. And so over time, you'll get to where all employees are a defined contribution and the defined benefit goes away.
The unfunded liability goes away without
Right.
question. That was the purpose behind the shift from the DB group to the DC group. And Carla, I'm glad you mentioned that. This is a conservative approach for a number of reasons. One is that there was a conservative approach used in the actuarial valuation. The key assumption, and I don't want to go sideways, but the key assumption is the discount rate. Well, how we take those future values and discount it back to the present. And the discount rate that has the biggest impact on this cost that we used was 6.5%. Most plans across the country have been trending that discount rate lower and lower. And as you go lower, the liabilities and the costs are higher. So you're being more conservative with a lower discount rate. So the public sector plans have been moving closer to a 7% discount rate across the country for pensions and the retiree medical plans. Using the 6.5%, you're being more conservative. And again, you're going to pay off, theoretically, you'll be paying off that unfunded liability over a 19-year period. And for the defined contribution plan, we are not accounting for any future forfeitures, which will be used to reduce employer contributions. So there's a number of impacts that we're looking at that make this look like a worst case scenario. There's no guarantee on that because we still are subject to the assets going up and down and the demographics and the healthcare costs for the pre-65 group. Now, we are controlling the costs for the defined benefit plan post-65 by just giving a flat dollar amount. And clearly the defined contribution future volatility is being controlled. So this is adding the benefit, but not being exposed to volatility for the future, or as much volatility.
We have questions from Mr. Kelly first and then Mr. Kobliss.
Good morning, David. Thank you for the presentation. You've answered most of my questions. I had one question, big question I had was what Terry had asked about the increase, and so you've answered that. Curious, just to put a fine point on this. This is back to what Mark and Terry were asking. This is to pay the annual premiums of Medigap insurance plan, and to use kind of like a flexible spending account if there are costs that are outside of Medicare or the flexible spending insurance benefits?
That is correct. The primary purpose is to pay for Medigap premiums, but the monies that are available, the amount that's available can be used for other medical expenses.
Do the employees then have the ability to shop and get a Medigap, any kind of Medigap plan that they so choose, or are they limited?
No, they are free to pick whatever one they want.
Okay. And then another question. I noticed that you said that it includes employees with 10 years of VRS service, but they have to be hired before July 1st of 2008. Seems like that's 13 years if I do my math right. But why are we allowing somebody with 10 years of service to come in and enjoy that benefit when a Loudon Water employee has to be there 15 years?
I think I can address that, Mr.
Okay.
Kelly. So we have employees who either we recruited or came to us from the county and other public service sectors. And so we felt like if you have come forward to Loudon Water with 10 years of public service, that we didn't want to penalize them. For example, we have someone who came from the county with 25 years of service. And, so far, 5 years at Loudon Water, it didn't seem right, since it was also somebody that we wanted at Loudon Water, to penalize them. And so that's how we sort of came up with looking at that, bringing 10 years with them. And it's probably a group of 10 to 12 people that have service that they brought with them from somewhere else.
Okay, thanks, Carla. And then one last question. Being overfunded, is that typical in the public sector world?
Being overfunded?
Yeah.
Well, we're not quite there at being overfunded. You're almost there with the current plan. And no, that is far and above what we see with public sector plans anywhere. There's only a few plans that are this well funded that we have seen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Kobliss?
Yes. I'm a numbers guy, and it just doesn't add up, in my opinion. But maybe I'm looking at it wrong. So right now we're spending $500,000 a year on health insurance. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
No, we're spending. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Just for the past 3 years, the contributions were $491,000, $635,000, $560,000. With OPEB plans, there's a couple of different ways that you make contributions. And what Loudon Water has been doing has been paying the benefits for the current retirees, the 17 retirees, and that's considered under GASB rules to be a contribution. We've also been making contributions into the trust fund that's been set up to pre-fund this program, which is clearly a best practice. Now, having funded so well, you are in this great position with this funding ratio of 95%. So you have been overfunding for the past couple of years. I did not go back over the entire history, but for the past couple of years, you have been addressing this issue, which the bond rating agencies want to see. They would love the picture that you have now, either with the current plan or with the proposed plan. They would be extremely happy.
Hey, Dave, hold on here. Hold on. Too much information for me. I'm sorry. Okay. So you're paying $500,000 just for retirement insurance. Is that what you're paying this for?
No, that's not correct. For retiree health insurance right now, for those that are retired and are under the age of 65, we're paying probably around, Brian might have to correct me, but probably $150,000 a year. The rest of that, as Dave talks about the 500,000, the rest of that is our contribution to other post-employment benefits trust fund, right, to fund those future benefits. So the actual cost that shows up, on our income statement is the 550, but actually the cost towards health insurance specifically that we pay to Cigna on an annual basis is probably more like 150,000.
And that's for the 17 retirees.
That's right.
So we're paying $500,000 for our 17 retirees every year.
Well, no, I mean, I think that portion of the 550 that you're paying for other post-employment benefits takes it into consideration those employees who will get there eventually also. So the other post-employment benefits is making assumptions about your whole workforce and whether or not they'll get there. So it's not just specific to those 17 retirees. The $150,000 annual payment to Cigna is for those retirees, but the calculation, the actuarial calculation of the other post-employment benefits liability considers the entire workforce. Is that correct, Dave?
That is absolutely correct. And think of it as compare it to the pension plan for employees, where you are paying for the future retirements under the plan. So you're actually including all of your active employees, the 300 active employees, you're including that in a future projection, and that they will retire, and that the money will be there for when they retire. So
no, I got all that. I'm just, the numbers just aren't adding up. So 17 times 4,000 employees. I mean, that's only $68,000.
But it's not 17.
For us to just pay their insurance. And this is doubling our insurance for just retirement. And then but right now we only have 17 people. This is $500,000 extra a year. I'm totally confused. But like I said, I'm not the expert on this, but this is a heck of a lot of money to just, and I don't even know how many retirees we're going to have that are past 65 years old that are going to benefit from this. And, I'm sure that the health insurance company has some kind of actuarials that will show how much that we think that there are actually going to benefit from this that are going to be older than 65 in future years. It's just an incredible amount of money that each year for the next whatever years. So, I mean, maybe I'm the only one that's stupid on this, but
Well,
like I said, there's a reason why I stay out of health insurance.
Well, I will say, Mr. Gobelis, this is a lot of information, and you know me, I love my numbers, and it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around all of this. But again, what we're proposing is that there are probably 82 current employees, I think 82 is the number, that we're assuming will retire from Loudon Water. They will, if they retire before 65, they're going to keep our health insurance. And then when they turn 65, they will then participate in this post-65 plan. So all those assumptions are built in. For those that are not in that initial group, 140 some, it's also assumed that, they will work at Loudon Water, retire from Loudon Water, have our health insurance, have pre-65 health insurance once they retire, and then go into this program. So while it The 990, I agree, sounds like a lot, but again, it's 990 compared to the 5 something that we're paying now. The majority of that going to the OPEB liability on an annual basis, and we don't have any choice about that, really. And I think when we looked at it, it was probably, I don't know. I mean, our personnel budget is 34 million. So an additional, 400,000, I'm not sure what that percentage is, but it gets confusing because we have to remember that OPEB liability, we have no choice there. We have to pay that on an annual basis. That's amortized over the 19 years. Does this program increase that? Yes, it does, by 4.1 million over time. But again, I think it is a lot to sort of take in. But I mean, I feel confident that we've spent a lot of time going through it. What the calculations were also based on is a proposal that we received from Cigna. And Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we got premiums from Cigna for a Medigap plan, and so that's the numbers are comparative to what we would have to pay. So I don't know if that helps or just adds confusion, but I'll let Mr. Kelly ask his question. We'll move.
Carla, Mr. Campbell was next. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Thanks.
Hi, David, thank you for the presentation. And thank you, Carla. Hang on, I'm gonna shut my window. I think they got the lawnmower going on out here. It's a little bit better. Sorry about that. So I got 3 pages of notes here. I'm trying to track 2. It is a lot of information, at least for me. But so I'm looking at the annual benefits. You've got the 30 years and over, and we've got an annual benefit of 5,600, if I understood that correctly. Is that 5,600 total for a couple, or is that 5,600 for one spouse and then another 5,600 for the second spouse?
It will be another 5,600 for the spouse.
Okay, so
It's an employee plus one, so it's 2 5,600s.
Okay, so we're really looking at 11,200 per couple, per family, something like this.
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. And then in terms of your discount rate, is that what you're applying to our trust? Are we assuming that we're getting a 6.5% rate of return over time, or how is that working?
Essentially, that is the end result. But in the actual evaluation, what we're doing is, I mentioned the future projections, discounting that back to the present. That's where we're using the 6.5%.
Okay.
So it is the key assumption that has the biggest impact on actuarial costs. So in a roundabout way, it is assuming that the fund is going to earn 6.5%, whereas most public sector plans are still using something closer to 7%, with the trend clearly bringing the discount rate down.
And what's the time frame that we're looking at that 6.5% discount rate? Is that 10 years, 30 years? How long are we going out?
Essentially, for the actual evaluation, we're taking active employees out to retirement out until death. We're looking 50 plus years out into the future.
So we're assuming a 6.5% rate of return over a 50-year period?
Even 50 plus.
50 plus, okay. And then you mentioned that our unfunded liability will go away at some point as we phase out the I guess the Group A to the Group B and this. But when do you anticipate that would go away?
There's 2 ways that we're phasing out that unfunded liability. One is that you are amortizing that, paying off the mortgage over a 19-year period right now. So after 19 years, theoretically, we expect that unfunded liability to go away. But the second way that we're confirming that it will not become an issue in the future is that we're moving to the defined contribution plan, where you're paying the annual employer contribution. There is no unfunded liability tied to the DC plan. That's part of the reason that we want to shift to the DC plan in the future, We want that problem to go away permanently.
Yeah, okay. Well, what I'm gonna, Mr. Chairman, what I'm gonna suggest, I know Mr. Kelly has a question too, so I'll end this, but there's a lot of assumptions here that aren't included in this presentation that, from my perspective, would be helpful for us to see at a following finance committee. And so that would be my recommendation, Mr. Chairman, is if we could have another discussion about this at the following finance committee with a lot of these assumptions sort of in front of us. I've got 3 pages of notes here, but it'd be nice to have these assumptions in front of us. So that's it.
There is, we did put together a lot of other information for the team along the way. There is a summary of the actuarial assumptions, mortality and termination. So there is a list of assumptions, and we have a summary of that ready.
Thank you.
And Mr. Campbell, we could actually send that out to send that out after the meeting if that would be helpful.
It would certainly for me.
You're going to send it to everybody, right?
Yes.
Thanks.
Mr. Kelly has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question. I heard, I keep hearing that people can retire before they reach age 65. And then I see a 15-year requirement. So I probably got this all wrong. So if someone started at the age of 20, could they retire at the age of 35?
No.
No.
They still have to meet the Virginia Retirement System retirement eligibility to get this benefit.
Which is what for someone under 65?
Well, there's two plans. Yeah. Plan 1, which was really the initial plan. You can retire at age 50 with 30 years of service. And Dave, I'll have to depend on you for the plan 2. Not a lot different than that, but
the eligibility for VRS retirement for plan 1, you have to be either age 50 with 10 years of service, 55 with 5 years of service, 65 with 5 years of service, or 50 with 30 years of service. That's plan 1. Plan 2, you have to be age 60 with 5 years of service, or the age plus service must equal 90. So you could be 60 with 30 years of service, which equals 90, or be eligible for Social Security normal retirement, which is going from 65 up to 67, and have 5 years of service. That's plan 2.
And just given that, just a comment, not a question, but it seems in the history of Loud and Water, only have 17 retirees over all these many years. It seems kind of low. I know people leave and so forth. People.
Well, those are I'm sorry, those are just the retirees that are currently on our health insurance. So they have not yet reached the age of 65. Okay. Although we've included a few that have retired, I think, in the last so many years. But yeah, so again, the way it works now is when you retire, let's say you retire at 52, you can stay on our health insurance until you're 65 with that, portion of that paid by Loud and Water based on that schedule that Dave showed earlier. And then once you turn 65 and enroll in Medicare, you have to roll off. And that's another important part of this this program is that employees or retirees will still be required to enroll in Medicare Part B. So that's why some may choose the Medigap, some may just, throw caution to the wind and just go with Medicare and, out of pocket pay, whatever the difference is. So, so yeah, we'll see how that kind of plays out.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Byers?
Yeah, I was wondering, what are the annual administrative costs for this plan and who will be the administrator?
Tom, do you want to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, very minimal. It's based on the folks, the members in the plan. We've actually reached out to our folks that currently do our flex spending account, which is WageWorks, and they've provided a number which actually initially is less than $1,000. The the RHSP account, which is where the defined contribution will go, will be within our current 457 plan, which is with ICMARC, and that is actually paid for by the member themselves. So that would be for the defined contribution.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I have a follow-up question, if I may. So someone mentioned that, or Carla mentioned that it's possible that a retiree at 66 would not use this plan to pay for supplemental. So in that case, would a couple be getting an $11,000 check every year?
No, this strictly has to be used for medical expenses as part of the legal setup of the program that Tom was talking about with ICMA. So it's only for medical reimbursement, medical cost reimbursement.
Okay. And then another thing I did, Carla, you threw out 34 million in employee expenses. I did the math, and it's 1.29%. So that's what would be the addition to our annual compensation for employees. So it is pretty small, but we still need to make sure we're doing the right thing. Does anyone else have any questions?
Mr. Allen, if I could just say, the real driver for looking at this was we've always sort of stayed consistent with the county, and we've known for years that the county's had this program. We know that they revamped it in whatever it was, 2012, 2014. And to be honest, this is something we've been looking at for literally years. Because we're a small agency too, in the whole grand scheme of things. And so to just get it to this point, for consideration is a big deal. So I appreciate the committee, and I appreciate all the questions. I probably know more about Medicare than I really wanted to and figure out how all that works. But I appreciate the committee considering this. I think it's a good benefit for a public sector, and hopefully you guys do too.
Okay. So as we move forward, and this is, in response to Brent, it sounds like the committee's not comfortable in approving this at this point. Can we do a straw poll to see whether we need more information to approve it? That's where I'm looking for.
Mr. Allen, Mr. Byers had to leave the meeting at 9 a.m., so he won't be participating in the poll.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I don't feel equipped at the moment to make a decision, but this was a great plan, but it's just a lot of information, and this is not an area of expertise for me either. So my recommendation would be to get some more of the assumptions that staff has. There's a lot of data sort of behind this presentation that's been given to us this morning. And so the committee members, board members, we can look at those assumptions between now and our next finance committee, and then come back together and perhaps be a little bit better equipped, and maybe we can be comfortable to move this forward to the full board. So that'd be my recommendation.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. Can we do this at the board meeting? Can we distribute the information prior to the board meeting, have a presentation at the board meeting with this new information, and then vote on it there?
Absolutely. I mean, we can get you the information, today or tomorrow for sure.
Okay. Then I'm going to propose that we do that. So we add it as an action item with this information and the new information for the full board. So it's going to hit the board without a committee recommendation, but I don't see an issue with that unless somebody else does.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David. That was a very good presentation. I appreciate it. And thank you, Tom.
Well, thank you all for your time today. And Carla, I'll get the assumption summary to you.
I think there still needs to be a vote, right?
Yes, sir. The motion would be to bring this item to the July 8th board meeting as brought forward by Mr. Allen. So we'd need a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Are there any other questions? All right, with that, I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Byers is absent for the vote. Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
and Mr. Allen.
Yes,
All right, unanimous of members present. Thank you, Mr. Allen.
thank you. Okay, the next item on the list is the defeasement of our 2013 revenue bonds. And we're going to get a presentation from Davenport as well as McGuire Woods. So,
good morning, Mr. Allen, and good morning, members of the board. First, I just wanted to acknowledge that since we first posted a lot of these documents last Friday, there have been some changes and some additional documents. This has been a pretty fast-moving project, and so I just want to acknowledge your patience as we work our way through this. Secondly, you're right, Davenport will be presenting this, and joining us today from Davenport is Courtney Rogers. I think you've had the opportunity to meet him in the past, though it's been a couple years since he has presented to the committee. And also joining us today from McGuire Woods is Arthur Anderson. They're acting as our bond counsel. And so at any point during the presentation, if you have any questions, just let us know and we'll be happy to answer them. At this point, I will turn things over to Courtney.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. That was a lot of intense numbers. We're going to go through some more numbers. I hope that they won't be confusing, but please ask questions along the way. We were going to do this in as Brian mentioned, we actually have split this up into two presentations because we have two different items we're going to talk about. So some of the questions you might have for this first section may actually be answered in the second section. But before I even dig into the presentation, I'll mention that I've had the great fortune of working with the authority since my career started in Virginia back in 1992. And we've actually done this with the authority a couple different times. The most recent time, it's been a number of years, was back in the year 2000. So there is a precedence that with the authority where we have done I guess a project like this. So let me start out by saying, of course, one of the things we do as your financial advisors, we always look for opportunities to save money. And we've been talking with Carla and Brian over the past year plus and kind of giving them updates. And the Series 2012 bonds, as well as the Series 2013 bonds, we've got opportunities for some budgetary savings. One of the things that I'll kind of as a bonds 101 is that the IRS changed rules a few years ago that said that we can only refinance bonds with tax exempt bonds if they're callable within 90 days of their call date. And we've passed the call date on the 12th. That was January 1 of 21. But the call date on the 13th is not until January 1 of 23. So in order to issue tax exempt bonds, we need to be within 90 days of that date, which would be the fall of 22, sometime next year. Obviously, one of the concerns is interest rates may go up between now and then. So rather than wait, we've got our thought here is to do one of two things. We could advance refund using taxable bonds, which means that they're going to be at a higher interest rate. And right now we're seeing that rate as somewhere in the, I'll say 60 to 100 basis point range. And we use 60 for our analysis. So we were conservative with our assumption. And then the other option is to defease the securities with some of your existing cash. Basically, if you go ahead, Brian, you go to the next page. Essentially, what that means is that we would put that cash in investments, and according to the bond documents, we have to put those in U.S. government securities. We would basically purchase an escrow of securities that would pay those bondholders off between now and the call date of January 1, 23. And that cost, as we the calculation of the cost of that is $68,525,000. That would basically pay off the bonds as of January 1, 23, and would mean that you end up not paying the full principal and interest that if you did not do this would be about $95 million and change. And just for your information, the interest rates that are left on the bonds, all the maturities except for one are at 4%. So essentially, it's basically an average interest rate of 4%. There are two kinds of different of securities, that we can purchase under the bond documents. One is U.S. Treasuries, Treasury bills, Treasury bonds, those types of things. Or there are special securities that the local governments can buy, and they're called state and local government securities. We call them affectionately slugs. And those allow local governments to, they're primarily used for this type of thing, which is paying off old bonds. And we basically subscribe for those about 7 days or more prior to actually settling on the actual escrow. And the one thing that's good about this is if you go out and buy a portfolio of Treasury bonds or bills, you have to settle on them. But these, if we subscribe for them and then decide that we're not going to settle on them, the penalty is that you basically can't go back for 6 months into that state and local government securities marketplace. So Brian, if you go to the next page, our thoughts are to, if this group gives us permission, is to go ahead and subscribe tomorrow for those state and local government securities. We would not close until the full board gave us permission, and that would be on July 12th. So the question, of course, is, well, why would we do that now? And the reason is that in order to keep the new money refunding that we're going to talk about in just a moment separate from this defeasance, we have to separate them by 15 days. And so if we were to wait and subscribe and then close on the defeasance, if we waited for the full board permission to do that, that would push out the potential pricing date of the refunding bonds that we're going to talk about in just a moment, and the possible new money bonds out further, which puts us at more of an interest rate risk. Because as we sit here today, interest rates are in really good shape. We'd really like to jump in the market as soon as we can. I'll pause there, Mr. Chairman, and see if there's any questions on the first part, knowing that some of the answers may actually come in the next presentation.
I don't see any, but I'll throw one out there. Why would we cancel the participation in SLGs?
Only if the full board told us that they didn't want to move forward.
Okay, and then so this might be answered in the future presentation, but they might understand that the money that we put in escrow is going to yield something, and then that we're using that yield to help pay the bond payments in the future. So
yes, sir.
Do we talk about how long maturity can we buy? Can we buy 30-year bonds in there?
No, sir. So essentially, we are only going to put the escrow in place between now and January 1 of 23. So it will be very short. There won't be a lot of interest earnings. There's a little bit in there, but for obviously a year and a half, a 1-year treasury right now is only 10 basis points. So our escrow is not going to earn a whole lot. Okay. So the other thing I will mention is that there is risk here. And the risk, of course, is that we're going to purchase the securities. If the full board and the finance committee approve this, we would actually close on July 12th. But there's going to be interest rate risk between July 12th and when we actually subsequently come back and issue the new money refunding bonds later in, I think in August. I don't have the schedule in front of me. That'll be in the next presentation. So there's a little bit of risk there.
So Davenport's not going to lock us in on a particular rate?
Unfortunately, we can't do that.
I was just kidding.
No worries.
Is there insurance? Is there interest rate insurance risk? I mean, is there any way to hedge that or no?
The only way to hedge it would be to do what we call a forward bond, meaning we'd have to hire a firm that would basically give us a guaranteed rate in the future. They're of course going to charge a premium for that. So you've got the pluses and minuses, but at the moment, for those of you that follow the marketplace, the Fed of course spoke last week. The 10-year Treasury initially jumped up about 10 basis points. But then the next day it came back down under 150, and that's where we sit now. So everyone knows that rates are going to go up. It's just a matter of when and what triggers that. I think there's enough uncertainty out there in the world with these other variants going on, with other parts of the world having issues with outbreaks of the pandemic, still ongoing that's keeping rates low, as well as one of the things we do have that's going for us on the muni market is there's a lot of money coming into the market that is looking for bonds to buy, and that's that supply and demand is helping keep our rates low as well right now.
Okay, all right, thanks. Didn't mean to get sideways, but.
No problem.
Hey, one quick question, just real high level. What's roughly our savings here of going down this path and doing this? There's a little bit of risk, but if I'm looking at just risk reward, give me a summary on that.
No problem. And I'm going to get into the details of the numbers in the next presentation, more about what, and we'll use the term savings loosely because that's why Arthur's here from McGuire Woods, is to keep me in check here, but not to run afoul of IRS rules. But let me put it to you this way: if we did this as a taxable advance refunding versus if we're able to do this, the next section we're going to talk about, it's about a $4.7 million swing. And that's really the differential between taxable rates and tax exempt rates is really what's causing that differential.
So so we could potentially save 4.7 million here by doing this. Is that?
Actually, that's additional. That's if we do it this way. If we were to do it as a taxable advance refunding, I think the number is going to be closer to about 9 to 10 million.
Okay. All right. Great.
So we're talking about substantial dollars for sure.
Yeah. No, that is. Thank you.
So Brian, I don't know if do they have to take action on this before we go to the next one, or just want to go to the next presentation?
So if there are no other questions, Michael, I think, has a slide with the recommended motion for this one. Yes, there you go.
Okay.
So this is our recommended motion for this item before we move on to the next one. Oh, it looks like Mr. Koblis has a question.
Yeah, mine's just a quick question. Maybe I heard it wrong, but did you say we have to decide today on this? And if so, are we allowed to do that without the full board? That's just my question. I don't mind going forward, obviously, to save a lot of money, but is that what you're asking?
Carl, I don't know if you want to answer part of that, but I'll answer. The first part is we are asking you to give us permission to at least subscribe for these state and local government securities, with the penalty only being that you're locked out of the market for 6 months, but you really have no need for those securities for the next 6 months anyway. So it's not really a penalty to the authority.
So my question just is, can we do that without full board approval, whether the committee can go ahead and do that? Just curious.
Well, I think that yes, you can, because, or you're kind of authorizing me to do that, I guess, because there's no risk in doing it. The thing is, you want to get in quick. So that's not part of the motion. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure we're asking for the committee's approval to do that. Is this part of the plan of what we're doing? And then when we come to the board, if you don't want to move forward, then the application goes away, and basically we can't go back for 6 months. We wouldn't go back in 6 months anyway. If we can't do it when we get to the board meeting, we're probably not going to do it at all for a long time. So that's not really answering your question, Mr. Koblis, but yes, I think you can allow us to subscribe because there is no risk in doing that.
Arthur, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Arthur. Is Arthur on there?
Yeah, I'm on here.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
There you go.
No, there really is no, you're not obligated to actually buy the securities at this point. If the securities were to be subscribed for tomorrow or today, you're still free. The full board is still free to decide not to do this. It's really a very ministerial action at this point that Carla would be undertaking.
Do we need to modify the motion? It looks more specific than it sounds like we're talking about, because it says move forward with the transfer of funds to escrow. We're not doing that.
No, well, that, I believe that's the recommended motion that you'd be making to the full board. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's
but
correct. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
correct.
So
We're
so we
really I'm sorry, what we're telling you Carla will do is really more for informational purposes than it is, we're not really seeking approval, formal approval, though. I think more or less just letting you know what will happen.
Because I'm not binding the authority in anything by making that application.
Yeah, that's right.
So the
And-
motion that's on the screen right now is the motion that you want us to make, or are we just going to motion to approve the subscription to for the SLG securities?
I think the motion you want to make as a committee is that you want to move this forward to the full board for approval, which will then be this motion, which is typically what we do. Show you the motion that will be at the board meeting. So I think your motion, Mr. Allen, or whomever makes it, would be that we move this particular item forward to the action or consent agenda, whichever you prefer.
Okay. So does anyone want to make the motion on the screen?
I'm happy to make it, but just so I'm clear, so you all don't need a recommend or a motion from the finance committee for these SLG to subscribe to the SLG securities?
No.
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 All right, then I'll make a motion that we recommend to the full board the motion that's on the screen here.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay. Jewel?
Thank you. Mr. Byers is absent for the vote. Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
and would this be on consent or action to recommend to the full board on July 8th?
Consent.
Consent. Thank you very much.
Agree.
Okay. So are we continuing on with the second half of this presentation from Davenport?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So we talked a little bit about interest rates, and so I thought as we're now talking about a true refunding of the 12s, I thought it might be good for you to see what's been going on in our world on the mini side since the last time we were really in front of you was, as Brian mentioned, in a couple of years. In 2019, we did a refinancing, October of 2019. And you can see since then rates have basically trended down. Of course, we had the blip last year during the pandemic, which was more of a supply demand issue that caused rates to spike during the initial days of the pandemic. But since then, rates have trended back down. They've gone up a little bit. They've come back down. They went back up earlier this year, and now they've come back, starting back down. And I think we're probably at the end of the period where rates are going to stay this low. And so we've been talking with Brian and Carl about this might be the time. Let's go ahead and knock these out. So Brian, if you go to the next page, please. This kind of goes back to January of last year and shows that basically rates have been fairly level, and low, which is good. And we're really at historic lows. We hit probably the very bottom in October of last year, but we're very, very close to that level as we sit here today. So when we look at just the 2012s, which is a smaller issue and doesn't go out quite as far, it's 27.7 million that we're looking to refinance. They carry coupons from 2.25 to 5%. Again, we've passed the call date, so these would be basically paid off as soon as we actually close on the new refunding bonds. They produce budgetary savings about 3.8 million, and this is current market plus 25. So we've still got a cushion in there in case rates do go up a little bit. Typically, when you look at it on a net present value basis, we look for a savings of about 3% or better. That's kind of the industry standard. We're at 13%, so we're well above that standard. So this, to me, is a no-brainer. It's really cleaning up. It's probably the last opportunity we have to refinance something like this because it's so short, not many years left on it. Because we will sell bonds at a premium, we will only issue probably about 22 million to pay off 27. But the good news is it is a clear winner at 3.8 million. Brian, if you go to the next page. So We talked about on the previous item using some of your cash, about 68 million and change of cash. If we do that, this is the revised 5-year plan looking at your cash balances. If we use that 68 million, of course, we will drop below the projected cash balance targets in next year, basically. So, Brian, if you go to the next page, we would propose to basically make that up with going out and borrowing new money to put back into the plan, back into the cash balances, if you would, to keep the balances up, just as the plan was presented to you back in March. You'll notice the numbers are slightly different. We didn't go completely to 68.5 million, just trying to make this not completely tied together. So you would be putting about 3.5 million of your cash into this plan, and basically replenishing it with 65 million of new money. And so that first 3 columns show you what, again, because we're selling bonds at a premium, we only issue about 57.5 million to produce 65 million to put back into the plan of finance, into the CIP. When you add it together, you'll see the new debt service there in the last column. And Brian, if you go ahead and flip to the next page, what we've done here is showing you the first column shows existing debt service as it stands right now. When we reduce it by the bonds we're going to refinance in the next column, the 2012s, and then the defeased bonds, the 2013s, then we add back this new money and refunding, which was from the previous page, that 106 million total. We end up with 308 million of total debt service, which basically saves you 21 million. Now, of that 21 million, 3.8 is the 2012 savings that we just talked about. And then another 3.5 is that differential between the 68.5 that we're going to use to defease and the 65 that we're going to put back in the CIP. So really, the difference there is about 14 million is attributable to being able to defease the 13s and replenish the CIP. And then 3.8 million is from the 2012 savings. So altogether, it's almost $18 million of true savings by taking this, by going through with this this plan. And then finally, the final slide is from or I guess 2 more slides. Sorry. This is our recommendation is to move forward with a competitive sale. That's what we've done for the last several sales that we've done with you all. It puts it out there so that anyone can bid on it. For this size that we're talking about, we've seen anywhere from 6 to 10 bidders, sometimes as many as 15 bidders. It's folks are looking for bonds. I mentioned that in the first presentation. There's more dollars out there than bonds available, so we will have no trouble finding buyers for our bonds. And then finally, the schedule for this portion would be for you all to, again, approve a motion to go to the full board for them to adopt forms of the documents at the July 8th meeting. We are scheduled to talk to the rating agencies this coming Monday, June 28th. We would get back the ratings for that, mail the POS, and look to sell bonds, which is the same day we would lock in interest rates, basically a month from Monday on July 28th. So, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to answer some questions.
Well, that's awesome stuff, and we need that 18 million to pay for our new Medicare gap plan.
Your OPEB.
Does anyone else?
Well said.
That's why we presented that first. See, it all fits together.
We can have the
I feel better
Cadillac plan now. We can have the Mercedes plan now. Mr.
That's
Chairman.
right. Let me go back and review.
That's right. Go back.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions? Can you guys, is there a separate motion for this? I'm looking at all the motions and it seems like I keep pulling up the same one.
There is, yes, Michael.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Anyone want to make this?
Yeah, and this will be the same as last time where we're recommending this motion to the full board. I'll make a motion that we recommend it to the full board and that it be placed on consent.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? All right, Roll call, Jewel.
All right, Mr. Byers is absent for the vote. Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Allen.
Yes.
Thank you. Unanimous of members present, sir, on consent.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to McGuire Woods and to obviously Davenport. Great.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Welcome.
Good day.
The next is an informational item, the financial summary report, Mr. Carnes.
Thank you. So total revenue through the end of May totaled 62.6 million. That's against our forecast of 56.7. So we're a little above our revenue projection there. Non-operating and operating expenses are below projections, a little bit total about 6 million. Capital contributions totaled 19.8 million at the end of the month. Through the end of May, we had 1,146 new ERCs. So far in June, we've added an additional 204. So year to date, we're at 1,350. Our projections for the end of June called for 1,100. So we're a little ahead of projections there. A little bit under 50% of those are data centers, just for reference. Total capital spending plan was budgeted at 89.3 million. We've spent 27.3. 8.5 million of that's funded by user rates and 18.8 is funded by availability charges. And at the end of May, we had a little under $324 million in cash equivalents and investments, earning 0.56%. So I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Kobliss has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mark?
Yeah, and I think I could speak for the rest of the board. I just want to make sure that it's clear. In no way do we want to hold up a great benefit for Loudon Water. And I just question the cost. That's all. I'm in no, and I think I can get a thumbs up from the rest of the guys that are still on the call. But I don't want in any way let Loudon Water think that we don't want to give an additional benefit to the employees of Loudon Water.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
No, and I agree. And it just to dovetail on that, it was seeing the 550 go to 990. It's hard to wrap my head around it, but it's becoming more clear. So I echo those comments.
So the plan would be that when I send out the assumptions from Dave, which will go to all members, I will have to provide some context because those members that weren't in the finance committee really aren't going to be up to speed on what we covered. So there may be more detail in that than you all need, but that would be why we would do that. And I'll provide some key points of things that we covered today.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, Carla.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
No, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
A second.
Roll call, Jewel.
Thank you. Mr. Byers is absent for the vote. Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Allen.
Yes.
Thank you. Adjourned at 9:28 a.m.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.